Hello, everybody, and welcome to the October 8th edition of the Gateway API sync. This is our EU-friendly sync, or intended to be. It's also pretty friendly to East Coast. This meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which effectively boils down to please be nice to one another. So please do be nice to one another. We have an open agenda. There are a few items on there. You are more than welcome to add items to the bottom of the agenda as we go. Feel free. And anything that we can't get to, we can put it in the parking lot and do next time. Please use the raise hand feature in Zoom when you have questions, interjections, etc., as this helps us to organize the call and kind of keep things flowing. All right. I'll take a couple seconds actually, because we try to, I think I see some new names. I may not. If anybody's new here and is like, or has just been to a couple of these and hasn't had a chance to introduce themselves, talk about what project they're working on or what their angle with Gateway API is, we'll give a couple seconds for that. It's always good to hear from newcomers, so please do let us know.
Yeah, maybe I can go. So my name is Achut. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So I work on API security at Google. This is, I think, my second meeting. Last time I was just listening in, applying to do the same. Um, yeah, I think
Cool.
my angle is I'm trying to understand how Gateway API can give us some of the information we use for API security. Just trying to understand and see if there is an angle there.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining the Chut. You may be, there's not a lot to grab onto just yet. I think we're going to talk about it a little bit, or I'm going to talk about, I'll riff on it a little bit. But one thing that you might be interested in is there's kind of a conversation starting, which I think is going to be a major source of conversation at KubeCon, which is about auth, doing auth with Gateway API. That might be relevant to your interests. And then policies in general. These are two areas that are a major focus right now that they're not stable, ready things and need people like you potentially to help out with. So yeah, we'll keep talking about that. But let us know if there are areas that you're specifically interested in now. Please do feel free to ping in the channel, and you could ping me directly. I'm just at Shane, but also the channel is a good place to just say like, hey, I'm new. This is something I'm looking at. Does anybody have any insights? That kind of thing. We're pretty laid back. So glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. This is the SIG Network Gateway API channel on Slack, right?
That's right.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else new want to introduce himself? Tell us about what they're working on. All right, then assuming you guys can see my shared screen, we will get to it. Guy, go ahead and take it away. New round of enhancements to policy attachment.
Thanks, Shane. That's pretty straightforward, actually. I would like to ask to be assigned to 713. Well, I'm guessing it's going to be 713, right? That is the main gap around policy attachment, even though it was later on broken down into two other gaps. So not sure exactly which one relates better to policy, but if I remember correctly, I think we're keeping 713 open, if not forever, but until we reach a point where policy attachment is somewhat standard. That's correct.
Roger that.
Anyway, I mentioned
Yeah, I
already
think
a couple of weeks ago that I've been working on a set of a short list of new enhancements for the pattern, which I plan to turn into a draft pull request very soon. So basically, this is just me asking to be assigned to the issue.
sure. Yeah. I don't think Nick is available, but last I talked with Nick, he is very much looking for other people to help come and push that forward. That's obviously something that cannot be pushed forward by one person, so it's great that you're jumping on that. I will go ahead and, if nobody has anything to say. Like, I think this would be a good time if other people are interested in working on policy attachment and meta resources to say something, because I know that Guy comes from the Quadrant project, which is an open source project, which is entirely policies for Gateway API. Like, well, maybe not entirely, but that's a huge part of what they do is policies for Gateway API implementations. They've done some demos for us in this meeting before. So yeah, if you're interested in policy attachment, let us know, because that's, again, one of the major things that we need to focus on and get moving into like a standard space.
Yeah, one of the things I'm interested in actually recently is to kind of collect all the like common policies and policies that implementations implement, to see what are some common attachment points, to see if we could understand if there is any attachment point which, you know, is common across all policies, and what is specifically the target of the policies, and how we could, you know, elaborate on making it better. And yeah, as far as I know, we don't support kind of label matches right now, right? But I've seen some discussions. Some of them is on the discussion that is related to policy attachment, some not. But yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of talk on policies on KubeCon and, you know, before.
Roger that.
+1 and
Where's that doc, by the way? Leora, would you mind putting that doc to our KubeCon discussions in here somewhere? People would probably find that interesting, because policy is one of them and auth's one of them, and Achut might be interested in that in particular.
You mean the doc
somewhere in there,
with the? You mean the
is
doc?
it, yeah, did we put it at the top here somewhere? I don't know if we've linked it in this doc, have we?
Wait, yeah. If you go to
that just
previous
says
meeting,
what we're going to be talking about at KubeCon.
if you go to previous meeting,
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah.
We can.
Did you find it?
I've also
Yeah.
pasted in the chat chain.
Yeah, pinning that to the top,
Okay.
at least in the next couple weeks, seems like a good idea.
Yeah, we probably should put it at the top. What, in the lag?
No, just
Okay.
+1 and endorsement to be picking up the policy attachment to carry it on to the next phase. I've really appreciated everything I've read in all of your detailed thinking about it so far. So I'm looking forward to helping review some of that stuff as it develops.
Very cool and very helpful. Thank you. I don't know what's going on. It's like, there it goes. Oh, I linked the wrong thing. I'll fix it later. But we'll put a link to the to what's going on at KubeCon somewhere at the top here, so that people can just see that. Cool. All right. So yeah, just keep in mind that that is kind of a conversation, and this issue is probably the main place that you can add comments. If you're interested in policy attachment, please do let us know in channel, or this issue, or just on these same things, because that is a major area of focus. We need to get some gas in the tank for. I don't know how much we're going to talk about endpoint versus endpoint slices without Rob here. I'm almost tempted to parking lot that for when Rob is available, but the release cycle one we can definitely talk about. Does anybody desperately want to talk about this issue, or should we park that for when Rob's back?
I want to listen to Rob talk about it.
Exactly. Okay. Well,
I can provide context on the endpoint slice issue. People want to talk about it today.
Sure. What is going on with? Okay, go ahead. I don't know what I did. Somebody's moving things. Okay, go ahead. I have major lag on Google Docs.
That's
go
me.
ahead,
I'm
Leora.
just trying to fix it up.
Oh, if you want to wait for Rob, you can wait for Rob. Or if we have time.
Okay, cool. So yeah, we'll park that one then. What did we have next? So this one, the release cycle begins today. I have some things to say about this too. We were talking about this as Rob and I were talking about this like yesterday. So basically 1.2 is out. Yay. Thank you for everybody that helped. Thank you for everybody who's testing. Please do test. Let us know if you run into anything. The Gateway API channel on Kubernetes Slack is probably the best place to just be like, hey, I ran into this issue, or just create an issue if you have something that's like, I see exactly what's going on. So basically this marks we're going to begin the release cycle for 1.3, which means we're going to start doing planning. and scoping and all these sorts of things. A lot of this is probably going to happen around KubeCon week, just because that's only a few weeks away. But I wanted to kind of mention, I've kind of already said it, that we expect that auth and policy are going to be two of the bigger things that are going to start getting more steam and be bigger parts of the conversation during this release cycle. Not to say that they're the only things, just to say that they are things that we see momentum building up for. We really need people involved in those, and that doesn't mean you have to like drop your day job kind of involved. Like, we need people who just have experience, thoughts, even just want to like test things out, experiment, that kind of thing, to get involved with these two slightly overlapping tracks of auth and policy attachment. Oh, geez, the lag today. I don't know what's exactly going on. Everything was fine a minute ago. But yeah, so I'd like to hear from people. Does anybody here have anything that they expect they're going to be putting a lot of pressure on during the 1.3 cycle? Like, basically, I guess I'd ask the question is there anything that you really want to see pushed, or you want to personally push for, to get into, to move to the next state, or to get a lot of work done before KubeCon London?
Yeah, I think I'm also really looking forward to seeing OSZ specifically getting forward. I am willing to put the time. I'm planning to put the time on either leading this or major, like, contributing to it. Yeah, I think I'm also very interested in the policy attachment as a whole, because once you come up, like, I'm like mostly interested to see if we could come up with some kind of attachment model that is well defined for most of the policies and kind of make the way easier for implementations. And it all intersects as well, right, with user experience eventually, right? How users, what's the discoverability of policies, like everything kind of intersects. But like specifically, I'm interested in authorization, and yeah, following that policy attachment, building that user experience.
Roger that. I also added user experience, on there in the notes, so that's good. Cool.
One of the things.
People?
Sorry.
Go ahead. No,
I was saying one of the things I want to bring up for discussion is, what can we do? I mean, maybe we can get implementations, maybe feedback on repos. What can we do to drive more adoption, right, for Gateway, just as a whole? Like, what do people?
This has been yeah. Sorry, I have slight lag. I apologize. This has been a conversation I've heard coming up a lot lately, because we have noticed that adoption has not been as rampant as we might have hoped since GA. I think there's some table stakes things that are missing, like timeouts, and I honestly kind of think auth.
I was going to say auth too. Yeah, like, I feel like one of the biggest blockers to increased adoption right now is really just looking at, like, what are people doing today with Ingress Ingress v1 in general, Ingress Nginx in particular, and like what's the gap between what's possible with that and what you can do with Gateway API implementations.
So did you get it from? Did you get feedback about it, Mike, or like is it mostly?
Oh, that's something that we're seeing, like, based on internal adoption of using one or the other.
Okay.
You say it one more time, just for extra clarity, what you're seeing.
Oh yeah, just basically like closing the gap between what is possible today with Ingress v1 and specifically Ingress Nginx, which it's deployed and used everywhere. And there's some things, auth being one of them, that are not possible today with Gateway API, and just closing that feature gap. It seems to be the biggest impediment, more so than any kind of other like UX issues or anything.
Roger that. So Actually, if somebody wouldn't mind taking notes, so I can focus on driving and moderating, that would be great. I
try
feel like
taking
I'm
notes.
context switching too much. I appreciate that. Thank you. That is a trend and a problem that I've seen at least in a couple other places. Here at Red Hat, we definitely see that there are missing chunks for us to be like all in on Gateway API. Actually, back on TLS policy, which Candace has been working on, is potentially one of them. It's definitely got a big impact for us based on our customers. And I believe we have a similar gap with session persistence. So these two are on our minds. I've also heard in general, this one's gonna be throwing some gunpowder into the fire a little bit, but I've heard in general that cloud providers and just places that provide Gateway API implementations in general have not necessarily seen a huge uptake that has been overtaking Ingress in terms of new users. New users are just using the Ingress API still a lot. Part of that is definitely the fact that Ingress is core and Gateway API is not. And here's the gunpowder on the fire. I am still kind of the opinion that we should be angling towards bringing Gateway API in tree at some point.
That's an interesting discussion.
I think there's also another factor of cloud providers lagging behind on availability of Gateway API versions.
True. Well, and there's a related issue that I've seen too, where it's like cloud providers and providers of Kubernetes distributions in general and stuff have to like lock in on a specific version of the CRDs. Like they
Yes.
basically are in a position where they must deploy their own, which is very disruptive to other implementations of Gateway API. Whereas if it was in tree and you just got a specific set with the version of Kubernetes you run, that would be a little less disruptive. It would be less problematic, I think, because it'd be more like Ingress. It'd be like, okay, well, this version of Kubernetes just has this version. So that's a thought. I know there's some support for the idea of moving this back in tree throughout the Kubernetes ecosystem, but it has been in conversations where I brought it up fairly contentious, which is why I prefaced it a little bit.
Yeah, did you run it through other people in SIGNet? I mean, I'm not aware, like, obviously I'm not aware.
I don't want to speak for any of them, but I would say that I am not necessarily the majority. Like there's a lot of let's leave things as CRDs momentum that's been going on. Actually, for those that may not know, multi-network, which has been a project for the last couple of years, is in fact deciding to go CRD-based approach, potentially indefinitely, because of the strong we don't want to change core much mentality that's been going on, which I have some personal opinions on that being potentially unfortunate in the long term, but that is kind of a theme that we've seen. So like between Gateway API, who forged the path, and now Network Policy, who also does some CRDs, and then multi-network. I mean, we've got three as a trend. People are kind of moving in that direction. So if we don't go in tree, we need to make this something that's easier for customers to interface. Like we need to improve the user experience for this kind of thing, which, just to make a shameless plug, I've got a thread in SIG Network mailing list where I've been building a document to try at least provide guidelines on how you do CRD APIs and upstream if you have like official CRDs, which Gateway API has effectively become one. If anybody who has a lot of experience with CRDs is interested in helping with that document, basically even just pointing out like, hey, we use CRDs in this way and it blew apart, please PM me. I've got to finish that doc up hopefully before KubeCon.
Yeah, I mean, all valid. I feel like there are two things that I feel like potentially are impediments for adoption. So one of them is we don't have a default implementation, which is another controversial thing. But I have been hearing it from a lot of people that like, maybe provide some basic default
Very
implementation.
controversial.
And the other thing is like, yeah, sorry.
Go on. Sorry, I'll raise my hand. I apologize. I broke my own.
No, that's cool. I mean, the other thing is just I'm going to put it there and then we can discuss the two. The other thing is, what was that now? Oh, how easy is to migrate to Gateway. I mean, it's not that easy. I mean, especially if you have an Ingress Nginx user, right? You have loads of different annotations that a lot of them are not supported. A. B, you need to choose a different implementation that are probably going to be an Envoy-based implementation. So I think this is also one of the big things. I mean, I think most of the people that persist with Ingress are, the vast majority of them are Ingress Nginx users, at least the way I see it. Yeah.
Would you say this? So the first one was the default implementation, but you
Yeah.
said a second thing. What was the second thing?
Migration. I mean, migration is not
Migration.
easy. Look, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to point to that. When I was at Kong, which I am no longer, I will say I think we were getting pretty close to having a decent migration story, but that is because we invested in Ingress to Gateway, like bringing our own stuff to Ingress to Gateway. However, which everybody should do, by the way, if you have an implementation and you want the Ingress to Gateway path to be easier for your customers, we have a tool called Ingress to Gateway in Kubernetes 6. It's part of the Gateway API project where Lior is a maintainer, and it is probably one of the better ways to at least start down that path of how easy I can make that migration. But it is not, I don't think that there's been many implementations jumping in there just yet. It is definitely hard to migrate. But I think what we found at Kong, and I don't want to speak for Kong necessarily since I'm no longer there, but what I'll just speak to my own experience, was that there was a lack of impetus to drive those migrations anyway. Like, again, not speaking for current Kong, but like when I was there, a lot of customers were in fact satisfied with what Ingress provided them. Because
So why investing in Gateway?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think that that's still an open question, and you're asking it as what can we do to drive more adoption? But I actually think that's still an open question for a good chunk. I think we can answer that question for some subset, but we can't currently say that Gateway API is a replacement for Ingress. I think, and by the way, if that scared anybody, that didn't mean for that. Those words should not be said. Sorry, replacing Ingress with Gateway, it scares people. But ultimately we should be able to say that you can use it instead in every case, and that's part of what's behind the user experience thing momentum, is that the user experience isn't quite as simple as Ingress. There are plenty of people where Gateway API makes a ton of sense. Like, I cannot manage infrastructure with Ingress. It's much clunkier and stuff like that. So like a gateway operator that uses the gateway resource and stuff like that can be very nice. And there's obviously features in HTTP route that you can't get out of Ingress. But if you just use Ingress at its most basic, which is a fair chunk of people, it doesn't seem obvious why you would switch, because the user experience goes from like, I've got this one resource which I ship with my app. I just put this YAML in here. It shows, the ops people like how I want this thing to be exposed. And that's it. It's one resource. I go and they just they figure the rest out. But if you switch to Gateway API, the developer suddenly needs to understand that there's a gateway and make references to it. And then that part can be a little bit like, why am I going to move to that? And that's a question that I think we should be able to answer fairly soon. I don't know what the answer is. I just think that we should try to answer that over the course of 1.3 and 1.4. That's part of the user experience story that we need to start delivering on for the developer persona, because we've focused on like the infrastructure admin and like the ops people really well. I think we've actually hit those use cases pretty well so far. But not the developer we're weaker on. We didn't deliver as hard as we had intended to.
Yeah, I mean, I have some answers to that. I mean, yeah, I mean, we could talk about it more in KubeCon and like, having some document, like, working towards 1.3, 1.4 to basically, highlight that. Yeah, I just think that it's like a lot of the customers are just doing like, value per investment. And like, if the investment is like, okay, let me translate every annotation of Ingress Nginx to what's the corresponding in Gateway. And, as well, Ingress Nginx does not have Gateway implementation. So I need to learn another proxy or something like that. I mean, so I think I believe this is one of the biggest issues. And I'm not sure, like, we're also seeing like, Ingress Nginx is widely like is I mean, is the most used implementation. Yeah.
So I don't want to dominate the conversation, by the way. Other people, please do feel free to raise your hand. I'm sorry. It's just I have a lot to say on this topic, but I really would like other people to pipe up. But talking about the default implementation thing, I don't know. I think most people in here, but not everybody in here, certainly kind of understands why that's controversial. We kind of made a verbal agreement that we would not have a default implementation for multiple reasons. One of those being not wanting to pick a specific data plane technology like Envoy, because we don't want to reinforce what I would say is already currently a growing monoculture. That is, with my SIG Network lead hat on, I don't want to see technology monocultures like that, because I don't think it's good for users. So that's part of it. But then the other part was, by not having a default implementation, I think Mike put it in here. Basically, he highlighted it. It's like this verbal agreement, I think, is the reason why Gateway API has been so successful. One of the main reasons why Gateway API has been so successful, because we focused on a standard and let everybody go out and compete. Whereas if you provide this default implementation, in theory, that competes with all these other ones, and like in the case of Ingress and Nginx, it just becomes the dominant one because of the tyranny of the default. So I think we rightly avoided that. However, having a reference implementation has always been on the table. Blixt, the project Blixt, tried to be that for a minute, although the community around Blixt has decided that we're actually no longer interested in that. That still is potentially on the table. I just don't know how valuable. Like everybody, I've heard over and over, we don't have a default implementation. I'm curious, do people actually want a default implementation in that they just want to know what they just want to have the selection of the implementation picked for them, or do they want a default implementation more like a reference implementation? Is that valuable?
Well, one quick question before everyone's jumping in. You said Gateway API been so successful, so can you mind like talking on like what parts of the success you were talking about?
Sure.
Like successful in terms of what?
It's successful in terms of being one of the if not the biggest sub-project in all of the SIG, certainly the biggest sub-project that SIG Network ever saw. In terms of collaboration, the number of implementations that have turned out, we have, 30 something implementations that implement Gateway API, and we have an impetus to move forward. We do have problems. We've solved problems in that we've solved infrastructure problems. We've solved problems in how the API design actually works. We're trying to solve problems in how you do things like, we were just talking about like quadrant and stuff like that with policies, so that you can solve problems that Ingress never even got close to trying to solve with. I mean, theoretically, if you wanted to spray annotations everywhere, and that's great. We do definitely have the problem of the user experience for that base case of like, I'm a developer. This port right here. This is where this is where I need you to send the traffic to the app. That needs work. But we've seen, even though we don't see the adoption going as hard as we've wanted it to go, it is definitely going up. People are using Gateway API. We just want to increase that. So I'll shush now. There's more hands up. I believe Candace had her hand up first. Go ahead, Candace.
I think Mike did, but did he lower his hand again?
I dropped mine. You can go.
Oh, okay. Well, I just had 2 comments about reference implementations. I think it's a good idea for especially things like conformance tests. If we don't want to necessarily favor one implementation over the other. And if we could have a reference implementation that we could use to develop conformance tests, at least initially, that would be a good idea. And then secondly, I think that Blixt would have gotten more buy-in if it had been written in Go, Golang, and since it wasn't, I think
it's in Rust, just in case anybody's wondering.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people kind of I don't know. You would have gotten a lot more people from this group, anyways, probably that would have been interested in it a bit more if it was written in Go. maybe we should port it to Go somehow, or at least use it as a basis for a reference implementation written in Go. I think overall, I think a reference implementation that we could use for supporting the development of conformance tests would be great.
But maybe I'm misunderstanding you, Candice, but like, am I wrong that the conformance test, they should test the actual implementation? So I'm not really sure how a
Yes,
reference implementation would help.
well, a reference implementation, I guess it depends on how fully you develop the reference implementation.
But like how that would, like, what's the developer story with the reference implementation?
I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you guys are talking about in terms of a reference implementation. It's not a real working implementation, or?
I think maybe I can just clear some stuff up about Blix real quick, if that helps. Should I just go there and do that, Liar?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Up until recently, so we actually understood what you said, Candice, in the Blix project. For the record, Blix is a Kubernetes SIGs project to build a layer 4 load balancer with Gateway API. It actually isn't that anymore, is the interesting thing that may be news to some people. But that's how it started out. Part of the reason was to create potentially a reference implementation to give you some idea how you would build controllers, and to help with conformance tests, and maybe even be able to automatically run it on PRs and Gateway API. The idea being it would not be a so-called default implementation. We literally went at it with the intention of this will never be used in production. We say it right on the README, and we also can't be used outside of a context of you are in kind using kindnet and MetalLB. Makes it very hard for somebody to go deploy that in production unless they've got kind clusters in production, and then Odin save you. But anyway, that's where it headed, but now it's in a completely different place. And we did actually have the control plane in Go, using controller runtime and trying to use best practices from controller runtime and stuff like that up until actually just a couple weeks ago. We are now fully in Rust. I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea that Blix could help inform a reference implementation if people think that that's really valuable. That project has moved away from Gateway API in terms of its goals. So its goals include supporting TCP and UDP route, but now it's moving more towards a different direction. You can go check out the discussions and read the README if you're interested in that. If somebody really wants to build a reference implementation, I think I don't think the question is necessarily whether we can. I think the answer is, as long as you do what Blix did and make it as, you are never with Blix, we actually said if we ever made it work outside of kind, we would add a kill switch so that it literally killed itself after an hour, just to be extra clear to people. We do not want them to use it in production. I think we've made that decision already. We could certainly have a conversation about it where it's like, that's okay. As long as it's truly a reference implementation and you've made the machinery work for that. The logistics of who is going to do that is the question. Like, if somebody wants to run and go for an implementation, a reference implementation, I think that's its own working group almost. Like, maybe that's overselling it a little bit, but it's like it's its own. Somebody needs to say, I'm really going to own this and move it forward. Blix kind of tried, but we were having more fun just doing low-level networking stuff in Rust. So it's serving that community in a different way now. Or rather, it's a different community now. It's not really connected with Gateway API. So just, if anybody's really interested in this, it's an open door. You just have to you have to say, I want to drive on this. I'm going to communicate this. It has to be well communicated. You can't do it in a vacuum. And I think that this would be a legit thing to do. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, you touched on my concern a bit where I added notes of basically like a reference implementation would by definition be nobody's like preferred primary solution. So I think that it's something that could easily stall out or fall behind or kind of lose momentum as everyone who is involved in this group is most of us are working on behalf of a vendor that has a Gateway API implementation That is our like first thing that we want to see succeed. So like even Ingress Nginx suffered from this a bit because it was in this position of like being this widely used default that nobody had a specific goal of like competing to make theirs the best. So yeah, just I would be concerned about if we would actually be able to sustain a reference implementation.
If
I
we
mean, I
put a
don't
controller
know-
in it that kills it every hour, if there's chaos code in there, we might be able to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of it is very valid. I think we may consider. I mean, for some features, I mean, so I think the reference implementation shouldn't complete the picture of all the features, that are like, especially those that are relatively easy to implement or something like that. But I mean, there's some variation. For example, authorization. You go right now, you see every different vendor is doing authorization differently, if they even do authorization, which I am a little bit concerned about because you just wanna. So the old dream of Gateway API, you just plug and play, right? Like you have an implementation, like you don't care about the implementation, you just have the API, then just plug in a different API and everything just works. This is a lot of our sales pitches as well, like presentations in KubeCon. But like I think for very important things like security and authorization, for example, this doesn't play, right? Like and even more than that, like you go look at Istio, right? Istio is like have some stanzas of how to relate to, I don't know, L7, L4 authorization. You go to Envoy Gateway, you see something else. I think a reference implementation is definitely not being it. So I definitely agree with you about, and also about how Ingress Nginx was so widely adopted before even being ready. But like, I mean, there are some things that may help to kind of, basically set the way of how things should be done, and not necessarily through conformance. So there are some things that can be achieved with conformance. There was like, I mean, it's just like an idea I've been trying to explore, but like, yeah. I mean, the Aussie example is, if you have any opinions on the Aussie example, I'm interested to hear them.
I kind of like I think it's a question of how quickly we're able to like iterate and move forward, but right now at the pace that we're going, I think that it's okay if we have multiple explorations of what auth-z handling looks like in the ecosystem of different implementations doing it, and then we can use those as inspiration to converge on something that is going to be an API that like addresses each of those cases well together. I have more hope for being successful with that and then just being able to move forward with eventually we get a common API for that than to try to like design the perfect common API in a reference implementation and then hope that it's good enough.
Yep. I see. Yeah, I mean, I think I like what Quadrant's doing because they are basically setting some, common practices and, how to define policies, some prior art. I mean, I've seen some of the discussions being like, okay, maybe we should adopt in Gateway a lot of the things that Quadrant's doing. So yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of what I've meant. But yeah, I'm definitely, I definitely understand the concerns, and I think I share the concerns. But yeah, I mean, I think we need to talk about whether APIs, like another API, could satisfy a lot of these concerns. But yeah, I mean, it's just early discussions, right? I mean, I anticipate we talk about it more in Salt Lake.
Yeah. So I don't see any other hands up.
Yeah, I
Please
mean,
do
I
raise
had
your
a
hand.
hand on different things. So about what you
go
said
ahead.
about like, I just need a port. So I wanted to ask if anyone has ever discussed about the idea of having, I don't know, maybe a different CRD, maybe a profile, like, maybe something that just like lets you install the simple thing. Is it just like, expose my application port 80, an autopilot thing, something like this that, if we suspect this is the if we suspect this is one of the impediments for adoption, maybe we should explore something like that.
Yeah, I'm raising my hand.
Oh, go ahead.
In theory, if we come up with a mechanism by which a parent ref is not required for an HTTP route, and then HTTP route and gateway class are in tree, I think we'll have a very easy path to adoption going forward. I think that it'll be very easy to send people that way. But I do not have a how that I think I would propose yet on how you say, yes, you can send your HTTP route, but it does not know its parent.
But like this is only one way, right? Like, what about just simplifying?
I'm highlighting one way in which we could move forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, what about simplifying the way of, like, I think at least to begin with, right? Like, I feel it's gonna be more simple to simplify the way of putting together all this HTTP route with the parent ref. So instead of the user going and learn how to basically apply the APIs, because if we suspect it's an impediment, so like, I don't know, a CLI is just install and say, okay, export it in, in port 80, or even like a different CRD that's like, I don't know, autopilot gateway or something like this that just.
I'm not opposed to more CRDs, but I don't love the idea of like we have another CRD. I could be persuaded. It's like what, like Ingress v2?
Well, yeah, I'm not.
I said it, Mike. I said Ingress v2. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think we should basically think about solution right now. It's just something that came to my mind. But I'd like to understand if this is really a concern, right? Like, if we do get customer feedback about, is it just so complex to us? So that's the reason we're not moving. And as opposed to a lot of the features are not supported, that's the reason we're not moving.
Well, I'll tell you what, especially since we're coming up on the last 10 minutes and we've had a really good conversation here, we should probably start trying to drive some actions. If one action is we need to create an issue or a discussion, probably a discussion would be a good place to start. Suggesting that a mechanism, just as a specific action, because obviously there's other ways we could do this. If we can throw the idea out there of like, what if HTTP route could be shipped with packaged with your app, but you did not need to know anything about gateway, would that solve a lot of people's problems? I'm happy to create that discussion as one particular action item and track and follow that discussion and try to pull people into that discussion that I think might be interested.
Would an approach that be like a selector of some sort on gateway to be like vacuum up any untargeted HTTP routes in these namespaces?
Yes, I think too. Yes, that's kind of I don't want a solution too much on this call, but that's kind of what's been in my head. The other thing that's in my head that's less of a solutioning, but more of like I can see a connection, is that I want to say, and I'm so sorry if it's not him and I'm taking somebody else's credit, but I want to say John Howard multiple times came back with the idea of like, and we've all said it's probably a good idea of having like where you don't need a cluster scoped gateway class to have a gateway. And I feel like this connects a little bit with that, where, your HTTP routes in a namespace can be configured such that they go to the gateway in that namespace, and you can have a namespaced isolated gateway kind of thing. I don't know. I think it connects lightly, but there's, I think, some connection there. I'd be happy to try to phrase this as generally as possible so that the solution is not what I'm pointing at, but I'll definitely be willing to start a discussion and follow up on a discussion and try to pull people in on that. Because I agree with what you said, Mike. That's probably a direction we could start poking. We just have to see if everybody agrees this is a problem. We have to describe the what and the why and see if everybody agrees. Because my concern is that it makes sense to me, but most implementations will be like, we don't hear nothing from our customers about this, which doesn't mean it's not a problem. It's just that if they don't hear it, it's hard for like PMs and stuff to prioritize it, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, definitely start discussion. I mean, discussion could be phrased either like, if we were to do X, would it be more simple, or how many of the people are like, I mean, yeah, probably your suggestion would be better. But I thought like maybe how many of you do not migrate to Gateway because they feel it's complex. I mean, but it's a more open-ended, which probably gonna get less traction. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
This
Yes,
is a great way to start pushing on the user experience thing that we were hoping next year would be a big focus, though. So thank you guys for your thoughts and stuff, because this is great momentum.
Yeah.
All right, don't see any other hands up. We do have 7 minutes. If anybody has any last minute thing that they want to talk about that's short, or has any, I would say, little shout outs that are important to Gateway API, something relevant, please do go ahead. Otherwise, we can adjourn for today, or any other actions to take. I've only proposed one. We could potentially propose other actions. Go ahead, Rajat.
I actually had a question about retry budgets. So we did retries in 1.2. I don't know why we skipped retry budgets. Like, is there a blocker behind it? Do we want to push for it?
I think the question was, where is retries at, and why didn't it kind of land in 1.2? Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Hang on, I gotta go back to
retries
1.2
and
because I'm pretty sure it's in there.
specifically,
But
no, like not
retries are
retries,
definitely
but retry budgets. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
I was saying like not retries specifically, but retry budgets within retries.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
budgets.
Yeah.
Okay.
That
Did we
was
even...
just going to end up being too much scope to try to tack on as part of it, but we did explicitly design basically an extensible model such that we should be able to add that functionality. I would love to work on that in 1.3, and I've actually been talking to both Flynn at Point and Linkerd, who's invested in that, as well as an Istio contributor that's interested in helping design something for that. So please ping me, and I will happily loop you into a discussion if that's something that you're invested into. And
Cool.
is there a particular implementation that you're working with on this?
Istio.
Istio. All right, cool.
Stop me.
You cut out, Shane? I heard stop me.
Yeah, me too.
Yep, can't hear you anymore.
If this exists, it's in an issue. So Rajat, that might be a perfect. Just stop me, you guys. Oh no.
Can you repeat the question? I think we lost you there for a bit.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you just dropped for a bit.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying you should always stop me. Please stop me. I'm terrible. Stop me. No, it's probably actually true. So I'm looking at I'm looking at the issues here, and I'm realizing we haven't really. It doesn't look like we've had one for retry for budget. So this, somebody stop me if I'm wrong, but I think Rajat maybe should create an issue for it.
It is mentioned multiple times in the configurable retries and HTTP route.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Issue? Yes.
Which is closed, which is what I was noticing. It's only in a closed issue, is it mentioned? So maybe it's worth, since this one's closed, dragging it back out into an open issue of like, hey, we need to follow up on budgets. Yeah?
Yeah, cool. I'll create an issue. No worries.
Thank you.
I'm good with
Rajat, we appreciate that, Rajat. Yeah, create an issue. And when you do, if you would please reference 1731 so that we know that there was some prior conversation and art on this. We would appreciate that.
Cool.
Thank you. I turned off my video. Do we have any other last minute? I think my bandwidth is okay again. Do we have any other last minute topics or shout outs or anything like that? Going once, sipping my coffee, going twice. Sold for $9. All right. We'll see you all next time on the next sync on Monday.
Thank you.
Or the next Tuesday sync probably for a lot of you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.